DNVR Avalanche Podcast. I'm Rudo. She's Megan. Over in Canada, that's AJ. We're talking a little bit of what ifs in Avalanche history today. It should be a fun show. I don't know that we'll get into anything too crazy serious, but maybe we will. Who knows how it goes. We did talk, or at least I talked a little bit about this last week on the Denver Sports Podcast. We talked about some of the more recent ones there. I wanted to start off today, given that yesterday was the 28th anniversary of them being named the Avalanche. What if they were actually named the Extreme, like they were supposed to be? Would they still exist? Would they still be a franchise?
There's something about that name that feels a little bit like a fake name made for a sports team in a movie and not a real sports team in real life. I don't know about the longevity of the Extreme.
It does have minor league team vibes
written
to it,
all over
like
it. Yep.
like like the Montgomery Biscuits, like where you're just like, what is the Rocky Mountain Extreme? Are you guys kidding with this? Like, this is silly.
Extreme what?
Yeah.
Extremely rocky? Mountains?
Yeah.
It was extremely the 90s. That's what it was.
It was extreme long before Mountain Dew got there.
Yeah. So just wanted to touch on that one, as I'm sure most of our chat already knows that at one point they were going to be called the Extreme, but the owners thought better of going with the fan vote on that one, thankfully. So
honestly, we could even stay kind of in that realm of what if the Nordiques had not moved and the Avs had gotten an expansion, it had been an expansion franchise at some point in the 90s or early 2000s when they had that big wave. Would Denver have eventually gotten another hockey team, or would it just have been left out in the cold entirely?
So I actually had another idea with this, because I think in reality, maybe the potential way that Quebec doesn't move is, what if Eric Lindros actually plays for them?
And then they end up with Eric Lindros and Joe Sakic on that team.
Right.
Good God.
And maybe the owners still run out of money and they have to sell or whatever, but certainly there would be even more star power there if Lindros decided to stay and Quebec stays. I have to imagine Colorado would have been one of the destinations for an expansion team had Quebec not moved. Obviously, they wouldn't have the history of winning right away and all of that, but I have to imagine there would still have been a team in Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, instead of Columbus, maybe the Avs end up with what the Blue Jackets got, and the Avalanche history looks like what Blue Jackets history does, because they had to start their franchise in that early 2000s wave where it was very, very hard to make a good hockey team out of the expansion rules that they had in place, where it was just a ton of third and fourth line guys, and hey, we'll put you near the top of the draft.
Yeah, this podcast would be a lot sadder if it was Columbus's history for the Avs. But hey, maybe Minnesota and Colorado were destined to be enemies no matter what, if that was the case.
Our podcast logo certainly would look a lot different. I don't think there would be any of those numbers on there, because Joe Sakic wouldn't have been the GM, and so all the things that would have happened after that may not have taken place. It would have been a totally alternate universe. The funny part is that Colorado Columbus connection still lives, because maybe Chris McFarland would have ended up the AGM like he did in Columbus.
Aww.
Oof, man, that's a tough I don't want to live in that reality. I'm glad that what if didn't play out.
I feel confident that hockey would have, an NHL team would have been in Colorado
one way or another.
Okay.
At least we'd have hockey.
It just might not be good.
Some cities got to live with that.
I mean, that's been like Buffalo's heart song for like 15 years.
Oof.
Watch it 2 times the speed to catch up. That's really funny.
There you go. Easy life. Fun fact, you can game YouTube with that. If you watch our whole pod at 2x speed,
that's what I do every day.
We get 200% viewer retention for that because it's like you watched it twice.
Oh, I love that.
All right, so now I'm gonna make a bunch of YouTube burners and just 2 times the speed. Yeah.
2.5.
Anyway, yeah, it's funny because obviously, like, we don't actually have the answers to all of these things. These are what ifs. It's just, hey, maybe this is a thing that could have happened. So don't take any of the answers too seriously here. But go ahead.
I think other ones that jump out to me that I'm not qualified enough to speak on because I was like 9 when it happened. But what if the Avs don't match the Joe Sakic offer sheet and he becomes a New York Ranger?
Yeah.
And what if Teemu Selanne and Paul Kariya were healthy the year that they spent in Colorado? Because as much as we talk about like, oh, this is a failure and this is that, whatever. It's there's also like they weren't healthy and they never really got, like, that team never got off the ground. Expectations were always so high for them and they never really got a chance to like do their thing. So it's I feel like that stands out as a pretty big what if as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a number of those, and if we're like kind of talking about the golden era of the Avs or the classic era or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
What if Montreal doesn't just hang Patrick Waugh out to dry and he doesn't demand a trade?
Yeah.
Like, does Colorado ever win a cup, let alone the first one, without a Patrick Waugh in net? I'd be hard pressed to think they win that first one, certainly. But
you have to wonder, like, with Pierre Lacroix, they would have done something.
Sure.
Like, that guy would have pounced, and he would have he knew that was like the one thing that they were really missing. But what if Patrick Waugh never happens and Pierre Lacroix has to look around the league and find another answer? Where does that go? Does Colorado become the team that makes the late career push for Dominik Hasek after he left Buffalo?
Maybe.
Does it change an entire generation of Avs fans from believing Patrick Waugh is the number one, and instead we're all Dominik Hasek truthers? Like, how different is that? Like, it's that I think is a fun one, because Pierre Lacroix would have done something big, bold, dramatic. He always did. He always found a way. It would have been. There's the alternate universe where Montreal does not screw up the Patrick Waugh relationship. Would be fascinating to see how the Avs adjust, and if they would have won any Stanley Cups, if they would have won more Stanley Cups, whatever it could have been.
Waugh was holding them back. AJ's right. No, I'm just kidding.
Yep. Confirmed. They would have won 4 of them. Yep.
We might have a conversation about that a little bit later in the show, while in a different position, perhaps. But before we get to that, sticking with the golden era, another one that came to my mind. What if the salary cap didn't happen when it did, or at all? Would it really matter that much for Peter Forsberg? Probably not. His career kind of petered out anyway fairly quickly after the implementation of the salary cap. But Chris Drury might have stuck around. Does Colorado keep together a stronger core and not experience that weird late 2000s we're not good anymore period?
I have no idea.
Yeah, me either.
Like, I have no idea what the what the fallout would have been. Like, you're talking about a completely different league-wide landscape.
Yep. It's the Avs were going to have a lot of shoes to fill anyway. Obviously the Forsberg thing, but they were far from set in goal at that time as well, as we know in our timeline, where they rotated through a number of guys ranging from Jose Theodore to Peter Budaj. So
it almost would have been ill-advised because of the natural end to players' careers as they begin to grow older and the need for young players to be ushered in and begin getting acclimated to the league and a new young core to emerge from that. There has to be a changing of the old guard and a turning of the page, and I don't know if prolonging that would have harmed maybe some of the young players that get brought into the fold and start a young core anew for Colorado, even if, like, I'm thinking Matt Duchene territory, but even if, because we know that wasn't quite the permanent solution, but I do feel it was a necessary change in direction that was going to come inevitably, and that might have just delayed the inevitable by a couple years.
So would the Avs turn into what the Red Wings kind of became? Would the Avs be the team getting into the playoffs every year to have a 25-year streak, but not really that competitive by the end of it? I say that, but like the Wings won a cup in 2008, right? So, there could be some rewards there.
Yeah, the Wings got they had the Zetterberg Datsuk draft picks like late in the draft that became, certainly Datsuk was a Hall of Fame player. Zetterberg was, I know there are people out there who think he was. I don't really have a strong opinion on it, but like you get those guys, you get the elite talent out of the later rounds, and that's how this next generation of the Wings even happened after all those guys had retired and moved on.
Yep.
The Avs didn't have that. Like Paul Stastny was really good, but he just wasn't Pavel Datsuk,
For sure. He's not going to the Hall of Fame.
Nope.
But, well, first of all, Megan, do you have any in this era? I don't want to steal any of your thunder. I figured more years would more come in the
future
2010.
Yeah. But I have a broader one that I wasn't sure if we should put some kind of a time limit on, because a lot of these could relate to injury. Like if one injury didn't happen, what if? And I didn't want to go down that route. So I kind of wanted to grant us each one health card to grant to any Avalanche player except for Peter Forsberg.
Oh, okay.
And we don't have to do it right now, but maybe something to be thinking about, because it could be from more modern era. It could stem back a little bit later and still apply then to this golden era as well. But maybe just keep that in the back of the mind.
Yeah, there is a topic semi-related that I do want to get to. So okay. I will get to that in a little bit. Since we were in this room, though, I did want to get to this. And you could look at this two ways. One, what if the Red Wings never went to the East? Or two, what if the Red Wings went to the East earlier? If they never go, is this still like blood rivalry to the death to this day? And
that blood rivalry might be Detroit and New Jersey instead.
Could well be, yeah. And the other side of that is like, what does something replace that on Colorado's side if they do go? Like, or is Colorado just kind of left on their own as the top team in the I guess Dallas would probably be the one most likely to fill that void a little bit, but I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine a world where the Avs and Red Wings didn't hate each other. So interesting either way on that front. AJ, did you have any more from the classic era? I don't really have too many others from this era.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are smaller things like what if Theo Fleury re-signed? Sure. What if they don't make the Theo Fleury trade and Robin Regehr becomes a top 4 defenseman for that next era of early 2000s defense? Robin Regehr played 1,100 games in the NHL.
He was very good.
So, like, that was a big loss. In the Theo Fleury trade, what if they had traded Alex Tanguay instead of Robin Regehr? Or what if they had traded Martin Skula instead? Like, there are some little tweaks that you could make in history that could have serious changes, because even though Regehr was a better NHLer than Martin Skula was, Skula played a meaningful role on the 01 Cup team. Maybe that may not have happened with Regehr. So
Obviously, Tanguay's goals in Game 7 are legendary. So,
yeah, definitely. Like that. Those are. I don't know. Those are all like little things that you can think about of tweaks made along the way. That what if the Flyers had gotten out of their own way and gotten Ray Bourque instead of the Avalanche? Stuff like that. Like what, man.
It's hard because any one of those you can pick and just go down a rabbit hole of like the repercussions of over the last 20 years of how the entire league looks completely different because of any one of these like random moves that we're talking about. It's almost too hard to even think about because like if you're looking 3 years out from what if Robin Regehr was an Av, I have no idea what that team looks like.
Yeah.
Is Adam Foote still an Av? I don't know. Like, does Rob Blake ever come? I don't know. Anyway, on that note, we are brought to you by Breckenridge Distillery. Sometimes to get into these what ifs, you might need a couple of drinks to really get down into the rabbit holes. So go check out Breckenridge Distillery if you haven't. They're known as the highest distillery in the country. Their bourbon whiskey has won like literally double-digit awards over the years. So see, it's 2016, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, and 3 different awards in 2023, as well as a 4-time winner of the Colorado Distillery of the Year by the New York International Spirits Competition. So they win a lot of awards for their really good alcohol is the short list of what Breckenridge Distillery does. They also have an amazing gin alongside their bourbon that has won a bunch of awards. If you haven't been, you got to go check them out. As with some of our other products, they will be at the DNVR Broncos tailgate, so you can go get your drinks, give them a taste there. If you're not local, you can go to BreckenridgeDistillery.com. You can get home delivery of their award-winning spirits, or, of course, they're available in all 50 states at your local liquor stores, so you can check your local retailer to find yourself some Breckenridge Distillery alcohol. Enjoy it. Have the good stuff. And then when you drink too much and you wake up hungover the next day, that's where the Shady Rays come in, all right? You put them on, you sneak into the office, nobody notices a thing. They can't tell that you're asleep behind those sunglasses. It's perfectly fine. But they're actually good sunglasses, too. You can go over to ShadyRays.com to get yours today. When you buy 2 pairs or more, you get 50% off your entire order. They have dozens of styles, bunch of polarizations. They even have ski and snowboard goggles, if that's your thing. They've got you fully covered. And the replacement policy is amazing. First 30 days, don't like them, you lose them, or you break them. Just let them know, and they'll send you a new pair. Well, whatever suits your fancy. You can try a different pair. You can just get a replacement pair. They're awesome. Go to ShadyRays.com today. Use the DNVR code. Get some. Join the over 250,000 people that have given it 5 stars. Second period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast. Moving into these future eras, and I want to get back to the injury one because we could do the one-player injury card. I do like that. But the other question I had was specifically for the Avalanche, what if no concussions? Because this spawns multiple eras of Peter Mueller,
right?
Joey Hishin, Connor Timmins, Bowen Byram, even someone like Jesse Winchester. It's so pervasive in, I'm sure, all hockey team history, but in Avs history especially, of how much it has affected not only players' careers, but what the Avs roster at times looks like. Does it make a meaningful difference if the Avs had less injuries over the course of some of these seasons? Like, how many seasons would you point out where you're like, if they were healthier that year? I think last year, a lot of us would feel like that. Are there a handful of other seasons like that over the years?
Well, specific to concussions, because of how much it impacted players that hold a lot of value to the organization, just to include Byram in recent history being one of them, it would have a transformational impact on the trajectory of the Avalanche if just concussions alone were no longer an issue.
Sure. I certainly the modern Avs. I do think it's a little more one-offy when you're talking about someone like Mueller and a little bit earlier. But even that maybe could make a significant difference on some of those teams.
Yeah, I think the combination of Peter Mueller and Joey Hishin in the same era, if you say, maybe Joey Hishin has exactly the same career where he was a really good AHLer, but he even, he even said that he was never the same after it, and that part of the question marks surrounding Joey Hishin was how small he was.
Yeah.
But he helped make up for that by playing a really aggressive and feisty style. He was a guy that just was not letting his size hold him back. And Joey Hishin will stand out to me as a maybe he doesn't become much in the NHL anyway, but maybe he becomes freaking Nick Suzuki, maybe he becomes that kind of guy. And if you throw that dude onto a roster that already had Paul Stastny and Matt Duchene, Ryan O'Reilly, like Gabe Landeskog, like your forward core it's pretty fun.
Yep.
It's pretty fun.
That.
So I just think that yeah, I think Hishin is probably the big one, but you remember Peter Mueller when he first got to Colorado was really good.
So good. He was so
next to Matt
good.
Duchene, and you remember a lot of the conversation in Colorado at the time was, how can we help Matt Duchene?
Yep.
How come we can't find a line mate for him? And getting, if he had a Joey Hishin next to him, or maybe Joey Hishin and Peter Mueller next to him, there could have been just a totally different level for that era of Avalanche, where those two guys, had they lived up to their potential, they didn't have the head injuries take away from them. We might have seen a very different Avalanche era had those cats gotten that opportunity. But maybe nothing changes. Like, there's always that possibility that not that what we
Peter
saw
Mueller
those
had
couple
a hot
of games,
month and a half, and that was it. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's stuff that you see all the time. Sven Andrighetto had a hot month and a half after the trade deadline too.
Yep.
And we saw he never got close to that again. And so it's I do think it's an interesting conversation, but it also it's so hard to project. But it is one. Hishin's whole career certainly stands out as one that you just look at and say because it happened so early on. He just never got a chance.
Some of the misfortune too in Avs history has led to things being ushered into Colorado that ended up helping them so much. I think about Connor Timmins, and would he have been an asset they were willing to part with to get Darcy Kemper if he didn't have any concussions?
If he's
in
an
his
established
history.
NHLer at that point.
Exactly. And so does Darcy Kemper come to Colorado? Do they win a cup with him in net if they do hold on to Connor Timmins because he stayed healthy?
Look,
this is a really fascinating
11th.
This rabbit hole is actually amazing, because you could say, if they keep Connor Timmins, what if they get rid of Justin Barron or Drew Helleson instead?
And then Lekkonen's off the table.
And there's no Lekkonen, and there's no Josh Manson.
Yep.
Or instead of if there's no Justin Barron, maybe what they do is they end up moving like Sean Barron's, but the first round pick instead of a second rounder. And so they didn't have their own first this year, like the trickle down of it not being Timmins, who we all kind of agreed at the time was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, this is a smart play by Arizona, who then turned around and immediately screwed it up.
Yeah, they did not make a good deal.
Yeah, and then it's like that rabbit hole of do you even get Darcy Kemper? Because remember, it was Colorado and it was Edmonton jockeying for position, and the Avs' willingness to put Timmins into that deal is what pushed them over the top. Okay, so maybe If you take Timmins off the board, maybe they don't want Justin Barron. Maybe they don't want Drew Hellison. So it would be a really interesting. Megan, that is a great call out, because the implications of that are tremendous.
Have we gone full hockey caveman podcast? Is this now, if it weren't for concussions, the Avs would have not won a Stanley Cup? Is that
no? That's similar to Wah was holding them back.
The takeaways from this pod are becoming pretty crazy.
They're hilarious.
Wah held them back, and thank God for concussions. Jesus.
August 11th hockey podcast, folks. But I wanted to expand that to your get out of injury free card. Someone in chat mentioned Landeskog, which I do think you might kind of have to discount given the recency bias there.
No, I'm just kidding.
I do think it would be interesting, though, if you could take away the concussion early in his career, too, because he's talked about it and he said, yeah, I had to back it off a little bit because of that. Similar to what Hishin said, obviously the impacts weren't nearly the same, but that's interesting. And then if I have to pick a player, I actually have two. One that I would actually pick and one that, like, just a personal thing that I would have liked to see him healthier. One would be Marek Svados, because I would have been really curious to see how his career played out. And maybe he doesn't end up being that good or anything, but he was supposed to be that guy in that era of Colorado. It's like, oh, they found their late round pick. This is the guy that's the extra bonus because they're the seventh rounder. Now they can start to put together an even better forward core. And AJ, I think I was talking to you off air the other day about how his shoulder was really the beginning of the end, and then his knee blew up, and that was it.
Yep.
And then the other guy for me, which do not think it would have changed the trajectory of the Avs at all, but I wish Ryan Wilson could have been healthier. I loved his play style.
Man,
he was so fun.
That is such a deep cut. That one did hurt because watching him play was a lot of fun. The since we're on the injury guys, the other one that I think about a lot is Steve Konowalchuk. Who, hey, back in the organization. Welcome back, Steve. But the chemistry that he had found with Sakic when he got here was really special, and he was that kind of like glue guy, you know, high intangible, but could also really help you win some games along the way. Yeah, he was definitely a dude. But I am going to disagree with you, Rudo. I am not discounting Landeskog's injury out of recency bias, because the Avalanche spent $7 million on a guy that they never got a chance to replace. If they had Gabe Landeskog available to them and we actually got to see last year's team as it was built, I think it could have been quite a bit different. You know, you take away all of the issues that they had in the postseason. Let's just magically say they have a healthy-ish roster, and even if you lose Helm and Cogliano throughout the series to injury, I'm also going to just throw in and say Nichushkin is there as well. But if you have that forward core with Comfer and Erod and Newhook and and I guess Lars Eller, looking at him too. But Landeskog's actually healthy. I definitely think they beat Seattle, and I like the chances against Dallas, because I just think that he has such a transformational effect on their forward core that this will be a great what if. And if the Avs don't win the Cup next year, it's and he comes back. It's 2 years of this. You just lost Gabe Landeskog for 2 years when he is coming off of like the 3 best years of his career. Like, he has been so good since getting put with McKinnon and Rantanen that even when they started moving them around, when they got Lehkonen and Nichushkin, they were deep enough that they were amazing. And you can't take that away. And if he never plays again, he becomes an almost Forsbergian level of what if about what happens if we get Gabe Landeskog in the entirety of his fucking 30s.
Yeah. And talking specifically about last year's playoffs, the thing about Landeskog is he essentially plays a pseudo center position for Colorado a fair amount of the time. And you start looking at that Avs second line, and instead of JT Compher being underwater or trying to force Lars Eller to work there, you probably end up with a Landy, Mikko. There's not really a center here, but it's fine. We'll make it work. And it makes them just significantly deeper all the way around. So, obviously, I think Landeskog is the easy cash-in card there if I'm allowed to do it. But
I didn't want to make that rule because we're still in this room with Landeskog. Yeah. I'm uncomfortable by it. We have finality to Forsberg in Colorado and the health. And with Landeskog, I think that's why I didn't want to take Landeskog off the table. It's just tough to talk about because we are still in this room. It has implications well beyond just this last season. But one that comes to mind is, would Alex Newhook still be here if Gabriel Landeskog played last season? Yeah. Would the forward group have been a bit more balanced, and would that have helped Alex Newhook in any way to strike some more consistency, build some more confidence, and it would completely change, too, the course of the offseason and the types of players then that Colorado has then targeted that made giving up Newhook necessary. And could Newhook have hit some of that potential that has been projected all this time in Colorado?
I mean, Newhook gets pretty much a full season of Erod on his line, right? With Landy in a healthy and in the lineup.
Different from the Couts and the Jason Magnez combination that was last year.
If Alex Newhook had opened up as their 2C next to Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog, I would like to believe that things would have gone differently. Yeah. And even if JT Compher ended up in that job, you could have had an Erod with a Newhook on your third line, where it definitely does change that dynamic. I think it's a great point that I think that dynamic really does have a good chance of changing, because part of the issue with Newhook last year was the coaching staff not being willing to live and die with some of the mistakes and some of the, we need to win games. We're out here to win games, and we just don't feel like he can whatever. And I think part of the issue with them being comfortable in the increased role was that he didn't have the safety blanket, the kind of that the Nichushkin and Landeskogs to be like, hey, I can lean on these guys to help me out with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Especially Landeskog, who has been a fixer for Colorado's forward core for such a long time, that not having him as that glue guy to really bring it all together could have forever altered the trajectory of Alex Newhook in Colorado.
Definitely a good point. The other one I have for kind of this, we're kind of bouncing all over the place at this point, but
Megan's crushing this.
Yeah. Obviously, we live in a world now where the Avs have a very established coach that they're very happy with in Jared Bednar. But what if, and you could take this in any direction, what if they never moved on from Coach Q? What if they found another coach that was more stable? And obviously, the Coach Q stuff that we know now with Chicago is rather unfortunate. But from a hockey perspective, what if the Avs of bygone eras found more stability in the coaching position? Would it matter? Did they just not have the talent?
Is this like hand in hand with what if the Avs weren't obsessed with first-time head coaches?
Sure, yeah.
Because it was like Mark Crawford in Quebec, and then he was the guy when they got here. Then they roll into Bob Hartley, who they roll into Tony Granato, and then it's Q, right?
Yeah, Q until they.
And then it's
Granato
very
back.
briefly Granato again,
and then
it goes Sacco, Waugh, Bednar.
Yep.
And so the only like retreads were Q and very briefly Tony Granato again.
Months, yeah.
I almost don't even want to count Tony Granato because they're the only team to do it.
Yep.
It's not like another team like
at least
gave
Bob
him a head
Hartley
coaching
got another job afterwards.
Yeah, like they were the only. I believe he's the only, or the Avs are the only NHL team that he was actually head coach of. I know he was coaching in the league, but so I think those were almost hand in hand, right?
Yeah,
like not just that, but what if they'd kept Q? But also, what if they were willing to go with established coaches?
Picked anyone but Joe Sacco.
I mean, the real one is like, what if they had actually picked somebody other than Tony Granato after Bob Hartley?
Yeah,
what if
fair.
they picked, because it obviously went well with Hartley. He won a cup and then coached in the NHL for another decade. But getting an established coach with that kind of championship caliber roster, and Lacroix's kind of like weird obsession with this Tony Granato experiment, it arguably cost them because he was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an awful NHL head coach.
Yeah, I know. Sure, injuries plenty to blame for that 02-03 team, but a lot of people blame Tony Granato a lot for the failures of that super team. So there's a lot of animosity there. This kind of brings me to another one that I had, but we'll get into it in a second because we are brought to you by Illegal Pete's. You can go get your delicious burritos, sit out on the patio, and wonder what if about the Colorado Avalanche in the beautiful sun. 3 to 8 p.m. happy hours at Illegal Pete's too, so you can get some margaritas, get the creative juices flowing. Gotta get in there. Gotta enjoy it. 11 different locations here in Colorado, including one just a couple blocks from the DNVR bar. Great place to go pregame for tonight and the Broncos game that I definitely care about in preseason. Look, football fans care about it, so power to you. Go get yourself some Illegal Pete's. Come down for the watch party of the Broncos game tonight. And then we're also brought to you by the folks over at FOCO, where you can get your amazing bobbleheads. You can also get licensed apparel and merchandise from pretty much every major sports team in the States, including the Avs. They got the Nuggets championship stuff. They've got Broncos. They've got the other team, Rockies. There we go. I figured it out. They got all of that over at FOCO.com. You can use code DNVR when you go over there to their website. You get 10% off and free shipping when you order. So jump on that. Use the DNVR code. Get yourself looking cool. Get yourself a bunch of bobbleheads like the ones we have back here that are steadily fitting because we keep breaking them. But that just means we need to go buy more from FOCO. FOCO.com, DNVR code. Use it today. Third period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast. I think a what if that sits in a lot of people's mind before we really get into the modern era. What if Patrick Waugh stayed?
Didn't abruptly quit.
What if he didn't quit 3 weeks before the season? The immediate impacts are the Avs probably aren't as bad as they are in the 48-point season. But does that mean they don't get Cale Makar? Does that mean they are stuck in this limbo of the Calgary zone where they're not a playoff team, but they're not bad?
How much of the bad luck that they had that year follows them with Waugh as coach? Like, sure. obviously the bad luck wasn't Jared Bednar's fault. Like, it's not Jared Bednar's fault that he loses his starting goaltender for the season in December, and they have to roll with Calvin Pickard and Jeremy Smith for 4 months.
Yep.
Like, that's obviously not on the coach, but you're living in a world where different things happen, and maybe, you never know what you've changed in the alternate universe where maybe if they keep Waugh, they just don't have the same level of bad luck that they did, where that was a god-awful hockey team. But if you go back and look at it, it's also one of the teams with the lowest PDO since that started being like tracked, like since we started caring about PDO. It was a comically unlucky team as well as terrible.
I worry about the personality clash over time in the differences in some of the players that would hopefully remain a part of the Avs core moving forward, and the differences and how that became at odds sometimes with Waugh's coaching.
I agree 100%. The Duchesne relationship had already been shattered, obviously.
Right,
but
one that I write off, but wonder how that would age with McKinnon.
Well, because when Duchesne got traded, the whole thing, the rest of the locker room was, hey, we want to be here. We want to do this as a team together. Are they that willing to do it under Patrick Waugh? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But thankfully, I don't have to find out.
Yeah.
We live in this world instead of that one.
It's an interesting conversation because McKinnon has specifically mentioned the communication aspect with Jared Bednar as a reason for him taking the steps forward that he did, where when he really started to buy into that, into what Bednar was selling, and he started having the high level of success that he did, it became a positive feedback loop where the more success he had, the more he bought in, which gave way to more success, which gave way to more buy-in, and then you get going in the positive direction where it just builds and builds and builds, and now you have a goddamn monster on your hands like you do now. If that doesn't happen, and he never builds that relationship, is Nathan MacKinnon, does his career look like Matt Duchene's? A good center who just never lived up to the franchise-changing player that he was supposed to be.
Yeah,
so that's a really big one as well, the communication and the relationship aspect, because I know that there were a couple of players in that locker room who did not love, we'll say, Patrick Waugh's communication style. There was
not surprising.
There was a pretty healthy amount of friction there.
Sure.
That when he left, it was like, whew, thank God.
Of course, there's always a ton of draft ones. Duchene, a great example. What if Tampa Bay had taken him and the Avs end up with Victor Hedman? I'm not even going to try to go down that rabbit hole because it changes everything. But I've exhausted most of mine. Megan, any more you gonna add, or AJ, either of you?
Go ahead.
I want to wait on mine. I feel like it's too big a can of worms.
Oh.
I'm curious what it is now.
Yeah, so I teased it already with the Bleakley conversation. If they had just picked Jared McCann instead of Bleakley, what would the future of the Avs have looked like? I mean, I didn't want to go for Pasta because I feel like that would make this conversation too ridiculous if they had somehow selected Pasternak instead. But
what if the mid-2010s hadn't just become a lost era of the Colorado Avalanche is basically what you're saying?
Right. And so that does feel like too big a can of worms.
I mean,
well, and not just that, but do you remember the guy that a lot of people wanted with that pick was was Brendan Lemieux? The family connection there. We want Lil Lemieux. So, but
up the bite count in Colorado.
That's true.
Also, what if it had been Adrian Kempe? You want to talk about a guy that fits how Colorado plays? Like,
that's a great one.
That one would be more interesting, yeah.
The reason why I discount both of Pasternak and Kempe is because that was right before the Avs started giving a shit that Europe existed.
Sure.
That was that era where they were like, it was like CHL or bust. Like they did not do a ton of drafting outside of North America, certainly early on. It was a lot of North Americans. And then with the Rantanen pick, they were like, all right, we have remembered that we can venture outside of this bubble.
Does that even count? That just fell into their lap. Like,
yeah, but they had their choice in that draft. The guys that they were really picking between were what's his face? Were Rantanen and Kyle Connor and Matt Barzal.
Yeah.
So you're talking about two North American guys that they chose Rantanen over. And the other one that teams absolutely fell about themselves in love was Lawson Krause.
Yep.
Granted, it's taken some time, but Lawson Krause was another one. Like, again, you're talking about all guys that were North America, and Rantanen was so different from how they had previously drafted. And the Bleakley conversation fits into that because it is really easy to just say, well, what if they had just taken David Pasternak? Because it's like, well, you're not going to fantasize about the world in which the Avs take Nikita Sherbak, Like, that's no fun. You want pasta, but you do, I do think it is an interesting this is where I can't speak about some of the what if stuff from the 90s because I don't remember the details of all those things.
Sure.
But know how the Avs were run at the time. They wouldn't have taken Pasternak. No. They weren't drafting out of Europe back then. They weren't investing in it the way that they have since. And I think I wonder how much of an impact the Bleakley failure had on them deciding we need to reinvest in this. We need to start taking this seriously again.
Maybe.
So we're grateful for Connor Bleakley, is what we're saying.
Confirmed. As the ridiculous
Connor Bleakley, good decision.
Connor Bleakley helped.
Concussions, A+. Connor Bleakley, what a pick.
Yeah.
Patrick Waugh, bum. Got it.
No, I mean it is an interesting what if, because you look at some of the guys that got drafted even at the top of the second round that year. Ivan Barbashev, Thatcher Demko, Alex Nedeljkovic, Vitek Vanacek. Like, there's a lot of pretty good players.
Apparently.
There were a ton of great goalies.
Yeah.
So, an interesting. That's certainly it stands out not just because the Bleakley experiment. Bleakley ended up being a total bust in Colorado and in general. The guy got drafted again and didn't do anything. But also because big time misses on the guys, on a lot of guys that were drafted in the 10 or 15 picks after that.
Yeah.
Do any of you guys remember his first training camp after he got drafted?
When he came in fat and slow. Yeah.
I wished I was a part of that. Well, that's actually a weird thing to say.
So I remember him stepping to Landeskog so this is when training camp was still they would just scrimmage for 3 hours, and they would mix up the teams, and he stepped to Landeskog, and Landeskog put him down and shouted at him. And it was like, at the time we were like, oh, he's not afraid of anything, we love the rookie's moxie, and now you look back on it and you were like, that should have been a red flag.
Yeah, Landy knew.
Yeah. Landy has actually been I think, is it Brian Burke that has said he thinks Landeskog will be a GM someday?
Yeah, I think it was Burke.
I think about some of the conversations that I've had with Landeskog about younger players, and he has been right about every single one of them. both in terms of the guys that did work out and the guys that he was a little more like, maybe not so much. It's actually interesting to think that, looking back on that, that's one of those like memories that I had where once I started covering the team, it changed, because I was like, he knew early on that there was an issue with this kid.
Yep. Some of the more modern ones I already talked about on the Denver Sports Podcast, as I mentioned, but if you two want to talk about them, obviously the big ones are, what if the Avs don't end up with Cale Makar, whether that's they win the lottery and end up with Nolan Patrick and it's a total disaster, or otherwise, what if Kadri is healthy for or rather not suspended for the Vegas series, and what if the Avs end up with a different player than Bowen Byram, whether that's Jack Hughes because they win that lottery, or if Ottawa gives them the pick the previous year and it ends up being someone like Brady Tkachuk.
I mean, the Byram thing, if they had one pick earlier, they have Kirby Dach.
Yeah.
How different is everything now? What impact does drafting either Jack Hughes or Kirby Dach have on what they do at 16? Do they trade 16?
Probably
do they
not
keep
Newhook,
it? Do they just take Newhook anyway, but they spend all of their time trying to figure out Newhook on the wing instead of center? Does Newhook and Dach together on a line on say last year's team make it so that they work out, and their skill sets all, by the way, just happen to play really, really well together as a guy that should be a goal scorer in Newhook and a very quality playmaker in Kirby Dach. Like that one alone, just one pick, not even talking about the Jack Hughes thing, which Jack Hughes obviously has a bunch of implications. Maybe they don't get Kadri, maybe they don't get Burakovsky, maybe they don't do any of that stuff. I still think they get Kadri, because Hughes would have been on an ELC and he wouldn't have been the center in year one. He wouldn't have gotten that job in year one. They would have given him time. So I still think Kadri happens, but I do wonder if Burakovsky does, because they could have played Hughes at wing. They could have played him obviously at 3C as well, but they would have had that kind of option to them. But I would say the Kadri stuff still happens, but the what ifs after that are pretty for real.
Yeah.
I think my grand what if is what if the Avs don't match the Ryan O'Reilly offer sheet and he goes to
the first one.
He goes to Calgary, and Calgary, because I've talked to people about this over the years, and they say, oh well, Calgary wouldn't have been as bad with him, but you remember because he was playing in the KHL at the time, when he came back to North America after the lockout, he would have had to go through waivers. Yep. Columbus was the first team on the waiver wire that year. They would have been able to claim him on waivers, and Calgary would have given up their first round pick to Colorado, which ended up being 6th overall in the 2013 draft when they took Sean Monahan. So what if the Avs get that pick instead, and Calgary loses out on the player entirely, and they don't end up with Ryan O'Reilly, and they don't end up with the 6th pick? What do the Avs do with that pick? Do they also take Sean Monahan, or do they take the guy that gets drafted one pick behind him and draft Darnell Nurse?
Boy, that would be, you end up in a world where your top pairing is EJ and Nurse.
You no longer have, in this case, you no longer have O'Reilly to go get JT Compher and Nikita Zadorov, so you never end up with, obviously, the Compher contributions to the Stanley Cup run, but you also don't ever get Brandon Saad.
Yeah.
So what is the trickle down effect of that? You know, do they make a mistake with the pick and take Rasmus Ristolainen?
Oh God.
Or Sam Morin? Do they get really wild in this what if and just draft a guy named Val Nichushkin? So this is the stuff that I think is interesting, because that 2013 draft has fed this era of the Avs a lot. When Jonathan Drouin suits up for the Avs, he will be the 6th guy from the 2013 first round to play for the Avalanche.
What? It's like Dano. That's the one that played 10 games for them from that draft, right? That's the 6th guy? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
That one didn't work out quite as well as the other ones, but
yeah, but so it's obviously it's McKinnon. It will be Drouin, and then Nichushkin, but also Zadorov and Burakovsky.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's a good 20% of that draft class.
Yeah, of that, just the first round.
Yeah.
You know, of the guys that got drafted in the second round that year that have played for the Avs include Chris Bigron and JT Compher.
They're dedicated to that year. It's a good year.
Wow.
And Arturi Lehkonen.
No, there you go. The list goes on.
He was also in that second round, yeah. So, you know, that's fun. I wonder, because you do wonder, like, what do they do? You have there's no need for them to take Sean Monahan after they take McKinnon. They have Stastny, they have Duchesne. You know, you have at that point you have McKinnon. You don't need Sean Monahan. So they probably do take one of the defenders, you know, Morin or Darnell Nurse, Rasmus Ristolainen, and they were all like Patrick Waugh Catnip, because they were all big guys.
Is there a world where they like try to move up to 4
and take Seth Jones?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I guess that 2013 draft is the obvious what if they did take Seth Jones, which
of course
is more like lore than anything else, because the Avs came out.
Yeah.
They came out so early in that process and said, we're taking a forward, we're not drafting a defenseman. And so it was never, in their eyes, it was never all that close to taking Jones. But you do wonder, you know, what if they had pick number 2? Do they take Barkov, or do they take Seth Jones? Is the temptation higher? What happens there? You know, because they won that lotto to move up from 2 to 1 to take McKinnon. Do they end up with McKinnon at 2 and not a damn thing changes? Like, it's that alone, that draft, and draft lottos are always really easy what ifs, right? Because the order of draft is literally changing, so you don't know what the alternate universe looks like. But Brady Tkachuk obviously is another one that everybody likes to talk about, but the 2019 one is the one that I think is the really high impact one. We'll leave 2017 alone because it obviously went very, very well for the Avs. It's all good.
We'll leave it alone.
The summer of 2017 me was upset about it. The current me.
I remember being at Sobo, with a bunch of pals, watching that draft lotto, and when they lost it and they got the 4th pick, we were all just like shocked.
Yep.
Like it felt like we'd been shot. Like it was the 61st loss of that season.
Arguably the lowest point in franchise history.
I would say so. I think it was, yeah.
But, it turned out okay, I guess.
It turned out okay.
That certainly feels like the system working. A 48-point team gets screwed by the lotto, but gets a transcendent player in Cale Makar. We cool. It's all good, baby. There ain't no thing here.
Maybe karma is real.
48-point season was good.
There we go. That's the way to cap off this show. 48-point season, the best thing to ever happen to Colorado. Confirmed. I'm good unless you two have any more you guys want to add.
No.
All right. We're going to wrap up a Friday show here. A fun one. Have a little what if thoughts here. You can always tweet at us your other what ifs and we'll be like, oh God, that would be terrible. Or hey, that would have been pretty cool. So send some love our way, whether it's liking this video or hitting us up on Twitter. We are off for this weekend. We'll be back. I don't know if it'll be Monday or Tuesday. We're looking at some middle sixes around the Central Division. So should be a fun one there for you guys to tune into as we're somehow still doing hockey content in the middle of August. Pretty impressive if you ask me. But
look, man, if we always want, we can always draft our most overrated foods.
Nope. We can do it. We can get through with hockey content. I believe in us.
We still have more left.
Yeah, exactly. We love all y'all, and we will see you in the next one.